Now, of course, ever since the development or the identification of the new Omicron variant, ever since it came to public knowledge, our government, as advised by SAGE, has completely ignored the reports coming from South Africa, where the variant was discovered, and embarked on, well, Project Fear again, telling us that if we don't get boosted, we're all going to die, basically, not exactly, but basically, and inadvertently threatening us with another lockdown should, well, the variant should we fail to curtail the spread of the new variant. Now, everyone who rightfully distrusts the government on this and the opposition's moan matrix of fear and hysteria and their failure to even act as an opposition would likely have taken a look at the official figures which expose the extent that this crisis I should say, is being blown up beyond measure. So if we get this up here, which is my post, if we click on the right, you can see that indeed cases do seem to be rising. Mm-hmm. However, if we go back and click on the left, you can see that the rate of rising hospitalizations seems to be imitating, shall we say, the lowest possible setting on a low budget treadmill, to be quite frank. It's pretty minuscule. I mean, how on earth is the NHS going to cope with its oversupply of ventilators, wards that it apparently can afford to close because it's not reopening the Nightingale hospitals? I mean, one could almost think, dare I say it, that it's hoarding resources, but that's just me being cynical. I think you've actually got the point there. Anyway, despite the hysteria which dawned on us from the start, there are signs. I'll start with those who peddled it from the beginning, such as Andrew Neil, who went as far as saying, of course, that the unvaccinated should be punished, despite the fact that you might have to correct me on this because I heard this from a second-hand source. 60% of people in hospital with COVID have been vaccinated. Is that correct? Or was correct?
I think it's about the right.
That's about right. Yeah, that is an old statistic. And there was, of course, also Nick Ferrari, who, despite the apparent looming crisis, headed towards the NHS, believed that, nurses should be sacked for refusing to take the jab. But it seems, in short, that slowly but surely, sanity is prevailing. People are starting to chill out about Omicron a little bit by seeing the variant for the weak, pathetic worm that it actually is in comparison with previous world pandemics like the plague. Well, actually, that wasn't a world pandemic, was it?
Yeah, old world was basically the
old world. Yeah, I suppose so. It counts. That's my point. So yes, if we proceed to see the announcements of the mild Omicron variants from Politics for All. So the Omicron coronavirus variant is causing a milder disease than the Delta strain in most Britain's UK government scientists are set to conclude. Hooray.
I mean, finally. You caught up with everyone else.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so
the day one, or whatever day it was, after it got to the UK, the doctor who discovered it, as I'm sure you will end up mentioning, came out and said, it's not as deadly as the other ones. In fact, it's quite mild and is kind of a godsend by comparison. Yeah,
and she said, look, let's just wait and see what happens. But from the evidence in South Africa, it's little more than just a slightly more contagious cold. And that's, needless to say, nothing to freak out about. But what's interesting, if we move on to the next article here, is that this seems to have been announced in virtue or as a result of a study conducted by Imperial College London. And the report says, or this article says, people who catch the Omicron variant of COVID may be less likely to end up in hospital, studies have suggested, amid rising case rates and the new restrictions across the UK nations. 2 new studies have suggested catching Omicron is less likely to result in severe symptoms and hospital admission than earlier COVID strains like Delta. The new data was released after Boris Johnson faced calls to outline his post-Christmas COVID strategy for England, as Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland have all announced new restrictions to tackle the variant. Recorded case rates of COVID across the UK rose above 100,000 on Wednesday for the first time since the start of the pandemic. But new research from Imperial College London indicates that people with PCR-confirmed Omicron are 15 to 20% less likely to need admission to hospital, and 40 to 45% are less likely to require a stay of 1 night or more. I mean, that is a massive.
I mean, if you wanted an Xmas gift in terms of this,
yes.
I mean, that would be it. Which one would you rather get? And obviously, it's the one where I'm home in a day.
Yeah, so nearly half are less likely to require a bed for a night. That's where we are. Doesn't sound like much of a crisis, does it?
And yeah, at the same time, I think Wales is locking down for Christmas. Haven't they announced that they are going to do that?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, they have. And we are going to cover that as well because, Mark Drakeford is a perpetually funny or entertaining buffoon.
You know what's hilarious? He went to the Labour Party conference and he gave a big speech, and his team did, about how, look, in Wales we've shown that the Labour Party can run a real government. And it's just like, dude, outside of your bubble, you people are a joke.
Yeah, making decisions about any reference to actual statistics, but still morally presenting himself as doing the right thing nonetheless. It's pretty typical of Labour Party. That's pretty much what the Labour Party conference has been for the last 3 years.
That'll be the conference without the masks as well.
Yes.
We all remember.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, this is excellent news for anyone who had been listening to Dr. Angelique Coetzee, who was the doctor who discovered the variant. Had everyone been listening to her from the start, we would have known this from the very beginning. Andrew Neil, believe it or not, did try to roll back on his attempt to blow this out of proportion, but I couldn't trace the tweet that I was looking for. So we're going to move on to a tweet by Calvin Robinson, who actually mentions that even this study that I referred to, that GB News cited, actually involved and was led by Professor Neil Ferguson, who has even said that Omicron is, of course, well, a cold. So if Professor Neil Ferguson is saying this, one of the famous doomsayers, then perhaps this is a sign that the current zeitgeist is going to shift in a more sensible direction.
They're finally looking at the science.
Yes, the scientists are finally looking at the science.
Nice. Okay.
Yes. So if we proceed to the next one. So as a result, no new restrictions are going to be enforced in England before Christmas, says Boris Johnson. Of course, we knew that, or thought that maybe Boris would lean on this side of it. But until it actually came from the horse's mouth, we were always open to the idea that he might be the same, shall we say, crapid version of himself that he was on that Sunday, what was it, a week and a half ago? Yes. So yes, he said he can't rule out any further measures after the 25th of December, with Omicron spreading at a speed never seen before. That's not my quote, that's the BBC's quote. But nonetheless, he clearly has seen some form of light, whether that be the unfairness of locking us down last year when his cohort kept partying, or just seeing this for what it is. Essentially, there is no point.
Very cynical of me. I really don't think it was him seeing the science, and instead, because I remember John mentioning, before he made this announcement, there was a long cabinet meeting. And this is in the middle of, as we were covering, all of the pressure on him about the fact that, like, you clearly look a dick. And we think you should be removed.
Bad PR, mate.
Yes. And everyone around him being like, look, if you do this, we're just going to get rid of you. Because you cannot be a man who's partying every day during Christmas while you lock everyone else down. And then it comes out a year later and you're like, right, my response is to lock everyone down.
Yeah.
No one's buying it.
No, he would never win another election again after that.
No, well, I don't think he will anyway. But
well, actually, no, that's a fair point.
The position may have become even more untenable.
Yeah, but yeah, thankfully he has rescinded his shall we say muscular panicking about people getting boosted, or he's still of course advocating for it, but he's not being a nut job about it, and has come to the right conclusion and decision in the end. But if we move on to the next BBC article, well, the BBC again has said, well, half of colds will be COVID, warn UK researchers, which means, well, half of colds will be COVID. So COVID is a cold then. Is this finally an admission from the state broadcaster that COVID is a cold?
I mean, I don't know how to read that. I mean, that is what the BBC has reported.
Yes.
Please no shoot me for quoting it.
Yeah. But no, they say in this very article that early evidence suggests fewer people are needing hospital treatment than the previous variants, with estimates ranging from about 30% to a 70% reduction. 30 to 70% reduction.
Oh. I don't even take the mick, because of course COVID was not just a flu for a lot of people.
But this is where you're reminded that this is the BBC reporting on this matter. But the concern remains that even if Omicron was milder, the sheer number of cases could overwhelm hospitals. Are you looking at the statistics?
Your own reporting. You're saying it's as bad as a cold.
Yeah.
And then you're like, yeah, it could overwhelm the hospitals. Like, if the NHS is so bad, even if there's no flus going on and we just have a cold going around, the thing is screwed. It needs abolishing.
Yeah.
It needs to be thought of as a secondary emergency for people who can't afford healthcare insurance at that point.
If 100,000 people are being reported to have a condition and are not going to hospital, that tends to suggest it's not that bad, does it not?
Yeah. Well, I just love how we've gone from it's just a flu bro to it's just a cold bro, except the people saying it's just a cold bro at the BBC, which okay, but that's the new.
No, I mean this is probably the closest we're going to get to someone, shall we say, on the obnoxious centre ground of the mainstream media admitting that perhaps this has been a cold since we started perpetuating this hysteria, or they started perpetuating about Omicron. Yes. Of course, the Delta variant and Alpha variants were very different. But, of course, these symptoms include, guess what? A sore throat, runny nose, and a headache. If you have these symptoms, it's a good chance that it's COVID, warns the UK researchers. And the Zoe COVID study team has been tracking the pandemic using feedback from the general public and estimates that half of these people experience these cold-like symptoms. They describe an explosion of COVID cases over the last week driven by the new Omicron variant and saying that, well, they're feeling slightly unwell, but they experience it as nonetheless a mild disease, and some don't even have symptoms at all. I mean, of course, that was the case with the previous variants, but those who do experience the symptoms...
Is one of the symptoms death? Can you die still?
Well, I suppose it could count. Yeah.
But that's what I mean. Like, the whole argument for locking down is, lots of people going to die needlessly, overwhelming NHS, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I'm unaware of how many people have died of Omicron. I remember there was one, which I remember us reporting on, which apparently turned out to not be the case, according to the hospital who was called.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the numbers are now. So
I've heard of several cases across the, 3 to be precise, across the, when we had the Alpha variant and then the emergence of the Delta variant, where people have died as a result of different things and nonetheless been cited as a coded, or shall we say written down as a COVID death.
Died with COVID.
Died as, well, yeah. And, well, we, of course, have to bear that in mind when we look at this data. But if we go to the next clue of admission, or shall we say concession, from the BBC, which is Sajid Javid, basically making it policy that self-isolation be cut from 10 days to 7 with negative tests.
Wait, but if you got a negative test, why do you have to isolate at all?
I don't know. To be honest, I don't really...
I suppose maybe it's delayed. Like, you've got it and you get negative, and then if you test again, you get positive in a day.
You know what? I actually don't... This makes no sense at all.
Someone clip that.
Let's just move on and go straight to what was it? Mark Drakeford, who has, of course, done exactly what anyone would expect of Mark Drakeford and tightened COVID restrictions because of a paralysis of the UK government being unable to act.
So we go to the next one?
Do we have the link? Yes. We'll cover this anyway. But this is basically Isabel Oakeshott basically just saying exactly what it is, saying that Sage effectively cried wolf from the very beginning to cover its own backside, pretty much. And that as a result, routine healthcare operations have been cancelled, care homes shut down. Basically, we've allowed kids' education and showing that the quality of lives of literally everyone to be compromised because, pharmaceutical companies want to sell us more jabs, knowing that, of course, the disease is very, very, even if we can call it a disease, extremely mild. And we should have listened to South Africa from the very start. And she's, of course, hoping this will be a watershed moment. But sadly, I don't think that this is going to be the watershed moment.
No, but I mean, I guess we're at least starting to get a turn into reality, which is neat.
Yes. By the way, the reason that the Mark Drakeford article didn't come up was because of an error on my part. But we are going to proceed with Mike Graham as the next. Because even though Mike Graham is, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a misfiring cannon on many issues, he makes a very good point about how Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance have basically almost suffocated Boris from being Boris, in saying that, the hopefully optimistic figure that he was at the very start has basically been quashed by the pessimism that's been surrounding him. And, should we listen to it from the horse's mouth?
With pushing this ridiculous nonsense about electric cars and heat pumps and, wind turbines and all sorts of things that don't really work. And then pushing, of course, his latest lockdown philosophy. That has not been a good thing for Boris Johnson. And I think for an awful lot of people, they'd like to see him getting back to basics, getting back to what he's probably best at, which is leading the nation in a way which actually inspires people. Boris Johnson feels much more at home when he's waving a flag, when he's sort of, talking Britain up, not when he's trying to deal with a problem that he can't seem to solve. He needs to get rid of Chris Whitty. He needs to get rid of Patrick Vallance. He needs to talk Sage out of the room and say to them, look, if you want to present me with the odd scientific paper, that's absolutely fine and dandy. If you want to present me occasionally with some advice about whether people should be going out for a walk for 7 miles a day or 6 miles a day, or whether they should be having a glass of Chateau Neuf du Pape at 6 o'clock every Sunday evening, that's fine. You can do that. But do not, please, try to control the public policy making of this country. Do Do not try to control the behaviour of the people of this country. Do not consistently try to nudge people into doing things that they don't want to do, because that, ladies and gentlemen, is not Conservative Party politics. It is not Conservative Party rule, and it is not what Boris Johnson was elected to do. It's that simple. We want to hear more of your stories, though. We've got Helen Dale coming up in the next hour. James Chiaverini here as well, and of course some wine and cheese.
Said there.
Yeah, I mean, well, I would go further. It's him saying, oh, it's not part of Conservative, but it's not part of democratic politics either. I mean, to have unelected, just random bureaucrats who work in their specific field and that's all they know, say that, well, if we do this, that. And it's like, well, it's not your job to make the policy decisions, because you can't. You don't have the amount of data or the number of concerns or the democratic legitimacy to make these decisions. I mean, all of these things are missing. This is why people hate Fauci and Whitty so much, is because, well, they've got no basis to be running the country.
No.
It's not up to them. Because, of course, they only see in their small segment of what they know instead of all the concerns about the economy or mental health or all the rest of it, which they're not lucky at.
Though they've been in the extraordinary position of assuming this legitimacy off of the basis of their expertise without anyone actually outside having a say on it. And they've almost become the de facto rulers of the country. And in Fauci's case, well, arguably more.
Yeah. I mean, somehow managing to survive the transition and still being in charge after having every opinion under the sun about COVID.
It's extraordinary. I mean, regrettably, we don't have the time to cover Mark Drakeford now, do we? Or do we? Do we have the time to cover Mark Drakeford?
Yeah, we could do it.
Okay, we'll cover Mark Drakeford because we said we would. So yes, Mark Drakeford has decided that, well, the UK's paralysis of government, the government's paralysis. The government is just unable to act on this, basically, despite the fact that everything that we have shown shows that it's acted, if anything, too much, has actually taken too many precautions.
I mean, I don't know if you have it down, but it's like the funniest thing taking place in Wales right now for people outside of the UK who might not know is, of course, that if you go to work, you can get a fine because you should be at home. But if you go to the pub, there is no fine.
Oh, brilliant.
So the Welsh government policy right now is, because of the COVID pandemic, go to the pub.
Yes, do it.
It's not going to work.
Do it. Yes. So yes, he's basically reintroduced the rule of 6 in hospitality venues, which will come into effect on Boxing Day.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site. Although this one, which I'm going to mention, is free, which is an article from John Wheatley deconstructing the 4 pillars of leftism and looking at their beliefs and the pillars on which they rest. But anyway, go and check that out. But if you'd like to get updates on everything else we produce, you can also follow us on getter.com with lotuseaters_com being the @. Thank you and goodbye.